Okay, so today's session, we're going to start a new unit, which is database design and development. So what we're looking to today's session, we're going to understand how this database management work. So before we dive in, we need to understand what is the database and what is the purpose of using database. So by database is simply the collection of information, which this can now be organized in a structured way or in a unstructured way. So what happens is that in the past, how data was shared was simply shared through emails or maybe via other type of working system. But now we have progressed to an era where there's big data, and there are loads of data that is shared across, and this can be through social media or any type of platform now software that will now allow you to share videos, create videos, or send images. So this is why we have unstructured data. So we have different type of databases that can help us manage this. So if we're looking into a structured way, we now look into working with MySQL, while if we are looking into working with unstructured data, we will now work with maybe something such as MongoDB. So what happens is that this MongoDB can be more useful when it comes to web application. So for instance, we have Facebook, where is a web application where you can record videos, you can upload videos, upload images, or wherever. This type of web application will now have to work with unstructured system due to the fact that the data that's been shared is not pretty much structured. And how do we manage this? We manage this through our DBMS. And as you can see, our image here, it simply shows how DBMS works, where we just have our application. Say, for instance, we have Facebook as an application, where we will now collect data regarding a person, such as name, age, gender, phone number, job title. All these data will now pass into our DBMS, which is going to define all our records. And you will now store this data in a remote area. So there are different type of databases we can look into. We can look into relationals or hierarchicals or even object oriented databases. So as we mentioned, organizational structure is simply the system which will now consist of explicit and implicit institution rules and policies. So by organized, we are following like a sort of hierarchical model, where we will now have a roof with the leaves, and these are looked like a parent and child relationship. So this is how a basic table would look like, where we have our attributes and our entities. So we will look into this further detail moving on. So what do we mean by data element? So fundamental data structure in a data processing system. And this will be any data defined for processing, which is a data element. Also, what do we mean by data sets? So data sets, we can now classify them as a collection of data. Is simply the creation of tables. And in these tables, we'll now have rows and columns. Each rows will now contain our attributes. This will now be subdivided into the categories. Also, what do we mean by form? Form are simply used for data manipulation. So when it comes to data manipulation, we now need to understand that we are working with SQL or MySQL or SQL or SQL, which is a structured query language. With SQL, we're now able to conduct some data manipulation where we're able to enter data, modify, delete, or even retrieve. So this type of data manipulation will now be used for form and reports. So as we mentioned, we showed a table where you had attribute entities and attributes. So what do we mean by entities? An entity is just any object in the system that we want to model or store information about. So an entity could be age, is a sort of way for us to classify our type of data. So an entity could be age, could be gender, could be any type of thing that can now help us to categorize and manage our table. So where do we find entities? So say for instance, in a database, we will now have to validate our transaction or validate any type of thing. We now have fields related to this type of entities, not just simply normal data, but we can now store more complex information, such as maybe transactions, serious numbers, or other important things. Another type of database, another important thing is how do we connect all our tables? How does these tables connect to each other? So they all connect through relationships. So by relationship, we just looking into foreign keys, and some developers will even call them joins. So these joins will now allow us to communicate from one table to each other. So there are different type of relationships where we could have one-to-many, depending on the criteria. So if we're looking into maybe a school system management, we can now see how we could have table related to one student that can now be joined to other type of tables, such as enrollment or courses, where allows us to understand what are the correlation between the attributes and how these have to communicate with each other. Also, another type of system is many-to-many, where a single table can now communicate with multiple tables in order for it to efficiently share data across. And then we could have a simple relationship, which is one-to-one, where we just have two tables which are simply connected to one joint. As we mentioned, attributes is simply the characteristic which is simply the characteristic of an entity type, and is simply going to describe itself. Say, for instance, we have our student or we have our customer into this entity. We now have all these fields. So these fields could be phone number, name, address, ID number, customer number, or whatsoever. So this is why we need attributes. And as we mentioned before, we have primary key and foreign key. So our primary key, which allows us to classify the attributes, will now be at the top of our field, our table, and this has to be a unique value. So if we have a repetition of this value, so this will now affect all our database system, and what happens is that the value will now become null. So we mentioned before, foreign keys, which are our joint, is simply a key which used to link two tables together with, and this sometimes can be called a referencing key. So we might have a value which is repeating in multiple tables and allow us to communicate. So what happens is that the relationship between two tables will now match. So let's just look into a website where will allow us to learn more about database system. So we do have SQL, which is included here, and we have also MongoDB. So W3 School is a very useful website where it has an online community that allows us to learn more about how working with the database system. So MongoDB is a non-structured database, and what happens there is that what it does, it stores data in a type of JSON format called JSON. And if you are unfamiliar with JSON, there is also a documentation with the tutorial. So from here, we have an example of a documentation. So we have our table with our attributes. So we have a title, post title one, we have another attribute value, which is body, category, likes. So we can even try this ourselves. So what we need to do, we now have our table, and this it is. So in order for us to work with MongoDB, we need to first download MongoDB. That means we need to directly go into MongoDB website. everything you need to learn about MongoDB is here. It has an introduction section where he explains us what is difference between SQL, SQL, and a document database, where we say SQL database are considered relational databases. And now what they do, they store related data in separate tables, as we mentioned, and they all now can communicate with each other with the foreign keys. And when the data is needed, is queried from multiple tables to join the data back together. While what happened with MongoDB, which is a document database, and which is often referred to a non-relational database, this one does not mean that the relational data cannot be stored in document databases. This means that the relational data cannot be stored differently, a better way to refer to a non-tabular database. So there are different instructions. So he also explained how to install MongoDB shell, where we need to download Mongoose and create our schema. So here, so we need to be able to download the platform. So we should go to MongoDB download. Yeah. So we need to go into the community, and you allow you to download either for Windows or maybe for Mac, depending on your operating system. So when it comes to this, we now have, once you've now downloaded, you have to be able to connect your file with your database. So here it takes you through all the tutorial to connect to Mongoose, how to create a database with Mongoose. So it gives you a full tutorial of how this can be now used. Also, it teaches us how to create collections. Okay, looking back into our presentation, when it comes to data manipulation, we need to be able to run some simple commands, and we need to understand the data types that are involved. So SQL or MongoDB have a system where it works pretty much like computer programming. And when it comes to data manipulation, we need to be able to know the type of data that we are going to query. So when it comes to character, we will now have char, we have text, then we have float to check if the value is false, or if the value is within a range. Then we have double and integers for decimal numbers. So when it comes to a relational database, we need to understand what is normalization, which is simply the technique of organizing the data in a database. So by normalization, which is a system which we now approach of decomposing our tables to eliminate redundant information. So this allows us to retrieve unnecessary data when we are able to remove them from our table. So there are several rules that has to be followed. So we have first normal form, then we have second normal form, third normal form, B, C, and F, and fourth normal form. What do we mean by first normal form? This now allows for first normal form, which is now follow these criteria where it has to contain only one atomic value. Value stored in a column should be of the same domain, and there are other information needed. So this is the example. How do we bring a normalized table into the first formal form? We have an example of how this can be done, but it's not the first normal because of the column that can contain multiple values. We have example for all of them. Now, when it comes to connecting a database to an application, what happens is like computer science database will have a connection, which means by we are just connecting our server side with our client side and our database, and by doing so, we now have a full stack application where we can now retrieve and request data from our system. So depending on which framework you're now using, you now have to look into the ways for you to connect our database to the server side. So as I said, it will now depend on the technology that you're working on. So we have open database connectivity, which this API will now allow you to access the database, and will now allow you to connect your server with your SQL database. Then we have also Java database connectivity, which is an API as well, which will allow you to work with Java environment and allows you to connect. So from the image, we can see what other frameworks required for us to communicate with these applications. So if we take a time, we can now look into relational database from Oracle web page. And from Oracle, we can now see we can create an account where we can now work with SQL. As we can see here, we can create an account. So when it comes to application, we have Oracle databases. So with this Oracle database technology, we're now able to create a relational database, and we can now work with our data manipulation, where we will now be able to create, retrieve, update, and delete tables. So I would like to watch this video.
Hello everybody, it's Holger Müller here from Constellation Research, here to draw your attention on something which is quite remarkable from my vantage point. When vendors do something differently, it's always worth paying attention. In this case, we're talking about Oracle, who's making available the Oracle database 23C free version in quite an un-Oracle-ish, is that even a word, a non-typical Oracle way. I'll be fill you in on the details, right? So Oracle Database 23.3, the developer release, is available now as a Docker image on VirtualBox VM and Linux RPM installation file, and Windows and Mac installation files are coming soon. The remarkable thing, you can do this without requiring a user account or a login to do that. It's available basically with no strings attached to play with one of the most powerful transactional and beyond, we'll talk about this in a second, databases available in the market. Pretty cool from my perspective. Key capabilities in that free version, it's not a tapered down version. It has the crown jewels of the Enterprise 23 release, which Oracle calls JSON relational duality. What is meant with that? For the longest time, Oracle's databases were only known for doing transactions. That has changed with 23C with the support of JSON, with the support of a document model in a very elegant way where data is not kept in a redundant way between the transactional store and the document store, but you will only store data once, and you can query data both on the transactional side or on the document side. So bring together the best of both worlds into one single database. It will be very, very interesting to test use cases for that, bring document transactional models together in one. The other thing which stuck out to me is JavaScript stored procedures powered by the Graal VM. So let's unpack this, right? Lots of code is in Java, stored procedures put in the database for great performance, but what's even more interesting, powered by the Graal VM. If you're not familiar with this, Oracle owns Java, has done some very low-level recompiling of the VM, cleaning out things, throwing overhead, coming in over decades in the Graal VM. It's around since quite a long time. A few years ago, I wrote a very cool case study about Graal VM being implemented at Twitter, something we're using all. You see my Twitter handle down here. And Twitter experienced over 15% performance improvement in the teenage numbers. If you want to turbocharge your JavaScript call, try out what the Graal VM can do for you with JavaScript stored procedures. Other features are operational property graph. I don't have time to go into them all. Access to Kafka APIs, a very interesting combination. It used to be really, really complex to do that before, and SQL domains. So it comes as no surprise that Oracle has labeled that release App Simple, right? Oracle wants to make it easy to build next generation modern applications, bring together both transactional and JSON document-centric use cases together in one single database. So if you're a developer out there, I wouldn't know what makes you wait to download and try, and no strings attached, the most powerful leading transactional database, having now document-centric capabilities of JSON duality available for you. Try it out, play with it, add it to your resume, add it to your certifications. Definitely an asset to have on your resume. If you're a manager of developers, find the lucky person to evaluate that and figure out how well your enterprise can benefit from Oracle 23C. So with no further ado, download Oracle 23C, the developer version, for free with no strings attached. And most importantly, my Twitter handle is there below. It's running faster with the Graal VM, as we said already. Use it. I would love to hear what you're doing, what you're trying out with Oracle 23C, the free edition. Thanks for watching.
Yeah, so that was a video introduction that described what are the features and the new and the latest trends that are coming from Oracle database management system. So this was everything for today. Is there any question? No? Is there any question, Sheldon?
No, there is no question.
Thank you very much for joining, and see you tomorrow.
Thank you.